Hello, Wake Up New Zealand, Carol Sakey speaking. It wasn't until after the last elections that this voice of He Pua Pua actually became publicly vocal. It was under the request from the Official Informations Act that the secrecy, the veil of secrecy was uncovered around it. Nanaia Mahuta had actually introduced the He Pua Pua into Parliament in January 2019. However, right through 2019, through the elections, not one politician in the cesspit of Wellington, behind the closed doors of Parliament, actually spoke publicly about He Pua Pua, but they were all knowledgeable and knew what was going on. But they chose not to speak out to the general public so that they could form their opinion as to what government got in next. And I'm sure people's opinion would surely have changed if they knew that this government was on about separatism and apartheid in New Zealand, because this is what it means. It means breaking New Zealand into two forms of governance. So we're looking at, as the propaganda machine, they deliberately did not speak about it. New Zealand endorsed the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Its name is UNDRIP, UNDRIP, in 2010, April 2010. John Key did a deal with the Maori Party for some support from the Maori Party. Hence, he sent Peter Sharples to the UN. So the UN Declaration in Ardern's time, she actually announced to be the first of these UN member nations to actually introduce it into our regulations, our legislations, making what was originally and what is the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples as non-binding by entering into domestic laws and legislations makes it binding in New Zealand and lawful, legal. And that's what Ardern has done. So she can act it out in her policies, in laws, etc. And that's what she's doing. So looking back in history, 15th of December 1988, Maori Action Groups filed proceedings in the Wellington High Court against the transfer assets of new radio and TV state-owned enterprises. And Sir Graham Latimer represented Maori Council and the Wellington Language Board on the 31st of May 1989, where Maori sought ownership control of New Zealand broadcasting frequencies and other assets, several other assets. They announced they're entitled to these under the treaty. I mean, this is rubbish. 6th of February 1840, there was no such thing as broadcasting frequencies. So the taxpayer continued to pay for this, whether you're Maori blood or non-Maori blood, everyone pays for it. And everyone's pockets are robbed to shell out billions of dollars to appease reward ludicrous claims. So the Maori Council and the Wellington Maori Language Board claimed ownership of the radio waves. Now, often you've heard people talk about this historically, where Maori have claimed they own radio waves. Professor Winiata said the right to the radio waves were not arranged resources transferred from Maori to Crown. So they're saying they owned them and they didn't transfer them for the Crown to use. So their ownership is theirs. They own the radio waves. And that's pointed out under Section 2 of the treaty, they said. So the 8th of December 1994, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Maori Affairs produced the final fiscal envelope of $1 billion to settle all Maori claims. All Maori claims. What happened? Because they're still going on. So far, just recently, they said only 61% have been settled. And that's 27 years later. So recently, Nanaia Mahuta's He Pua Pua, introduced into Parliament in January 2019, is being politically accelerated. Politically accelerated into a dangerous apartheid, separatism, division of peoples in New Zealand. So that 1st of December 1994, government announced a new Maori TV station and national radio service to be established in 1995 at the taxpayers' expense, the robbing of taxpayers' money again and again and again. So where did that money go? Let's look at some of those historical things. Robbing the taxpayers' money on Te Kiro Daily News Bulletin cost taxpayers $2 billion. Okay. Iwi ownership claims to the TV and radio frequencies. Maori claims to ownership of radio waves started with payment to TVNZ to produce 32 marae programs, $1,600,000. Payment to TVNZ to produce 30 waka Huia programs, $750 million. Payment to TVNZ to produce 14 hours of independent programs for Maori, $387,496,000. Payment to Educational TV to produce 13 Maori drama programs, $800 million. Payments to Tiratai Productions, a production of 24 programs for Sky Trackside, equaling $463 million, $804,000 of taxpayers' hard money for Trackside. Maori. 20 iwi and regional Maori radio stations, $100 million. Payment to Airtia Radio in Auckland, $498,636,000. Payment to Tioranga o Te Poko o Te Iklo, Wellington, I hope I said that right, $150 million. Payment to Mana Maori News Programs, Rotorua, $462 million. Payments to Ngātonga Kerero for archival programs, $18 million. Funding for the installation of a satellite distribution service for radio, for Maori radio, amount not disclosed. Ongoing annual costs and other costs continue, and so do claims. So when I talk iwi, I'm not talking all Maori here. I've been reading a book called The Travesty of Waitangi by Stuart Scott. He was married to a lady who has Maori blood, 1/8 Maori. Her great-grandparents were Maori, and she talks about New Zealanders being as one people. And she can see the travesty around what the anarchy that's happening, that is about to happen in New Zealand. So the treaty provided protection from the French and established the Maori as British citizens. In 1840, this was highly valued in 1840s. This time, no other native or Aboriginal race had been accorded this, a British citizenship. Lieutenant Governor William Hobson, Captain RN, on the 6th of February 1840, at the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, he said, "He iwi tahi tātou, let us all be one people." And until we are going to have a divided nation. Billions of dollars of claims have been rewarded to a few iwi pockets. Those that are paid for these iwi pockets have never been consulted. We have never been consulted, yet we keep on dishing out the money. There is no justification or justice when it comes to Maori-blooded privilege over that of other peoples in New Zealand. And when I say Maori-blooded privilege, I mean those at the top, the iwi who are greedy, are wealthy, are urging for power status and power and to control New Zealand. So 1/16 Maori blood running through 15% of the population being privileged over the remaining 85% of New Zealanders. Indigenous rights. The word Indigenous is questionable, but it's become non-questionable because we're not allowed to debate it. Because if we try to debate it or pose the narrative, what happens is you're called racist, white supremacists, and we're told that we're harming Maori. This is rubbish. It's just to shut us down from opposing the narrative. Because even Maori-blooded people themselves have been opposing the narrative of a certain party. So his public debate is hastily being destroyed, making this a very unhealthy country. So when it comes to questioning, debating, opposing the narrative, especially by one Maori party, Paka and Waititi, they aim to destroy anyone who opposes the narrative, destroy their lives completely. So Maori-blooded people are not Indigenous. They travelled, migrated to New Zealand on canoes, wakos. They are migrants like me, like other New Zealanders. It's just that they came here before us. Others came here after. We all came at different times. We're all migrants to New Zealand. So once again, Hobson said at the time of signing the treaty, He iwi tahi tatou, let us all be one people. The treaty did not state to elevate customary laws above national laws in New Zealand. So I've been researching Parliament speeches, 2010 ministerial statements to the UN Declarations of Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Parliament. So the sitting was the 20th of April 2010, and Simon Power said this morning at 4:45 New Zealand time and 12:45 p.m. New York time, this time the national government was under pressure to recognise the UN agreement. That's the declaration, the UN Declaration for Indigenous Peoples. Tara Henry said we did the right thing by signing the UN Declaration. Peter Sharples went over there because he did a trade with, National Party did a trade with the Maori Party, and the trade was supporting the Nationals. Therefore, they sent Peter Sharples over to sign this Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples. And Peter Sharples attended the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and signed the declaration on the 20th of April 2010. Nanaia Mahuta, at that time in 2010, she was of the Labour Party, Haraki Waikato, said the fourth Labour government established the Waitangi Tribunal. She spoke about the moving together, however, she believed Maori deserved much more. And she still does. She talked about particular inconsistencies between text and New Zealand constitutional and legal frameworks, saying they are difficult to overturn. Mahuta said after the agreements to the UN Declarations of Indigenous Rights, we can do that now, we can implement it. Build rights, interests for Indigenous peoples, meaning Maori. She also said, although 143 countries agreed to the declaration, none were going to do anything about it. They had no intention of implementing it. And that's what she said. They had 143 countries that signed it, had no intention of implementing it, making it lawful in their country, because it was a non-binding international agreement. Mahuta states, Labour is proud to say we mean to do what we say. Implement the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People into New Zealand in 2019, January. He Pua Pua, she started that. Because Jacinda Ardern had written this into New Zealand law as legislation to make it binding and legal. The signing of the UN Declaration was done under the veil of secrecy, and Pua Pua, its voice in Parliament, was also kept under secrecy until a request through the OIA was made, where it all came out to the general public what was going on, and the veil of secrecy was lifted. Now, you think about it, 2019, right through to the elections, no one said a damn thing, and nor did the propaganda machine, and that's no surprise. So that's every political party in the cesspit of Wellington are guilty, guilty, guilty for not telling the general public for what's going on. So April 2010, the Green Party supported Nanaia Mahuta in her supporting the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights. So they agreed with it. The Green Party agreed with it. Now, Rodney Hyde was in Parliament at the time, and he said the ACT Party is shocked at the government's support for the said UN Declaration, saying the Declaration asserts rights privileges no other New Zealanders enjoy. That there should be one law for one peoples of New Zealand, no matter what race, colour, creed, ethnicity, culture, colour of skin, neither by Indigenous rights. He referred to the UN Declaration as taking down the path of being a divided nation, splitting New Zealand in two rather than bringing us close together as one nation, saying that the UN Declaration sets New Zealand up to enable foreigners from the UN to come to New Zealand to criticise New Zealand's race relations, our policies and our laws and our democratic processes. So Parikura Haramaya said the UN Declaration was incapable and not compatible with New Zealand laws and democratic processes. It ignored reality, and that's what he said. But he went on as a Labour Minister of Maori Affairs, playing a significant role in setting up Maori TV and radio. And we're talking about the radio waves, owning the radio waves. After the Foreshore and Seabed Bill became law, Associate Maori Affairs Minister Tiriana Turia resigned from the Labour Party and went on to form the Maori Party. Rodney Hyde, at that time, responded in a parliamentary question time, said he was disappointed in John Key as to recognising the UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, saying the declaration had no practical effect, is naive and extreme, saying John Key, the Prime Minister, in recognising the UN Declaration, failed to honour ACT's no surprises policy. So when he spoke about that, he was referring to the National Confidence and Supply Agreement that had been agreed upon. So Hyde in 2010 spoke about the veil of secrecy, the same veil of secrecy that has existed today, particularly with Pua Pua, where it was kept secret right up and through to the times of the elections, 2020, a whole year. And it was only released through the Official Information Act. So that's Pua Pua for you, all under the veil of secrecy behind the closed doors of Wellington. So the voice of treaty makers replaced by interpretations that do not equate to the original treaty. He iwi tahi ta toa. I should say that properly. I'll try that again. He iwi tahi tato. Let us be one people. He iwi tahi tato. There, I believe that's correct. Greed, wealth, power, status of a few elite iwi who do not represent the majority of Maori. They represent socialism, Marxism, leftism, globalism. Narratives seeking to destroy the identity of New Zealanders, the identity of New Zealand as a sovereign country. Self-servient, self-rewarding, deliberately robbing the taxpayers of New Zealand, whether they have Maori blood or other. Doesn't really matter. They'll rob anyone. They rob their own blood. So I'm mentioning no names, so they know they're guilty. Then they'll know who I mean. I haven't got a job to lose. I haven't got a house to lose. And I've had a damn good life. And I will say what I like. You will not shut me down. I am not racist. I'm not anything what you're saying. I love New Zealand. I have lots of Maori friends, those with Maori blood. I have lots of friends from many cultures. And all I see is their hearts and souls, the same sort of hearts and soul I've got. They are like-minded. So these radical activists, self-servient, power status, that's what they are, leftists, Marxists, socialist, communist characteristics, you name it. So they want, if you speak up and oppose their narrative, they will try to shut you down in whatever way they can. They will see this video and they will call me all sorts of names. But you know what? I don't damn well care. You can call me as many grannies if you like, because I love being a granny. I don't care. Obviously, ageism is not being stopped anywhere, because I've had plenty of that, and it doesn't even touch the surface. So freedom of expression, freedom of thoughts has now become a crime in New Zealand. So if you oppose the government's narrative, New Zealand government hastily travels down this road of separatism and apartheid, and you're not allowed to oppose it publicly, otherwise you'll be called a racist or a white supremacist or something else. So going back to the signing of the treaty, he iwi tahi tatou. Let us be one people. Now, when I speak those words, which are beautiful words, this risks me of being character assassinated, pulled off of social media, and shut down. Because I quote these beautiful words, and they are beautiful. They sound beautiful. He iwi tahi tatou. That is beautiful. Let us be one people. Let us voice as patriots of New Zealand. He iwi tahi tatou. Let us be one people. Share, 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 and subscribe. Thank you.